I worked hard, but my parents favored my sister. When they asked for money for her, I refused. My grandparents supported me and cut them off. I believed my parents were finally treating me properly since I had shown myself, but it turned out to be nothing more than a demand for their daughter and her 6 children from 3 consecutive marriages. I grew up knowing I was not the favorite child. My parents were always more concerned about my younger sister Emma, who seemed to have endless opportunities and support no matter how many times she made bad decisions. I grew accustomed to standing on my own 2 feet. I worked hard, paid for college with a combination of scholarships and part-time employment, and eventually found a steady, well-paying job. My parents were never impressed, despite the fact that I did everything on my own. For years, I attempted to brush it off and keep going, hoping that one day they'd admire me for being independent. Meanwhile, Emma's life was a roller coaster. She married young, and her first marriage dissolved after 2 years because her husband cheated. She remarried quickly and had 2 more children, but the marriage ended when her second husband developed a gambling addiction and lost their home. Emma was on her 3rd marriage at the time I started my job, and she had 6 children ranging in age from 12 to 2. Her current spouse works part-time as a delivery driver and is attempting to launch his own business, but they are struggling to make ends meet. My folks have always been there to assist her out, paying for items here and there and making excuses for why she needs a little extra support. For a while, I was too preoccupied with my own life to get caught up in Emma's drama, but then I saw a difference in how my parents regarded me. They became more attentive, reaching out more frequently, congratulating me on my profession, and inviting me over for family dinners. I wondered if they were finally proud of me. Part of me had been hoping for this for years, and I suppose I was willing to believe they were turning a corner. Last month, they invited me to supper. At first, everything seemed normal. We talked about work and caught up on tiny family stuff, and for a brief period, I felt like a member of the family in a way that I hadn't previously. But then the topic moved. They started talking about Emma, how difficult it was for her to raise 6 children on one salary, and how my parents had done everything they could to help but were running out of money. They went on to say how fortunate I was to have a decent job and a consistent salary, that I had no one relying on me, and that I was able to contribute back to the family. Then came the shocker. They expected me to step up and take care of Emma financially. They had a comprehensive plan. First, they asked me to buy her a new 5-bedroom house because her present rental was too small for a family of 8. They wanted me to set up college funds for all 6 of her children, which they argued was only fair given that I was the only one who could afford it. They wanted me to offer her a $5,000 monthly stipend to cover basic expenses as well as seed money to start her own mommy blog business. They planned to receive approximately $2 million up front, followed by continued funding. I sat there, absolutely stunned. They weren't asking for a minor favor. This was a lifelong commitment that regarded me as Emma's financial safety net. In that moment, I recognized that their recent compassion was not because they had finally accepted me as their son, but because they regarded me as a walking ATM for Emma. I informed them that, while I was willing to assist with minor bills or in the event of an emergency, I was not comfortable taking on such a large financial burden. At that point, the family conversation shifted completely. My mother began to cry, accusing me of abandoning the family when they needed me the most, and my father labeled me selfish and ungrateful. They stated I was revealing my true colors and that they were disappointed with who I had become. The dinner finished with them storming out. I believed that would be the end of it, but I was mistaken. Within hours, Emma began assaulting my phone with texts accusing me of jeopardizing her children's future. She even had her children send me messages like, "Uncle doesn't love us anymore." It was unbearable, so I blocked their phone numbers. After a while, I couldn't believe the situation had gotten this bad, all because I refused to fund my sister's life. The next day, my grandmother, my father's mother, called me unexpectedly. Apparently, my parents had been assuring the entire extended family that their successful son would take care of everything for Emma before they even asked me. They constructed an image for everyone of Emma moving into a big new house, of all her financial troubles being resolved, and of me being the one to provide her with everything she needed. Now that I'd declined, they were facing a big wave of embarrassment because the family had expected me to come through based on my parents' premature bragging. My grandparents were appalled when they learned the complete story. They'd always assumed Emma's lifestyle was sponsored by her different spouses, and that my parents helped out because they wanted to, rather than because they'd gone into debt to support her. They were so upset by my parents' behavior that they are now threatening to remove them from their will. They informed me that they would rather leave their estate to me and my relatives, who work hard and do not take advantage of people. As the situation spread around the family, I began to get messages from relatives offering their support. Some of them admitted they had no idea how much I had been dealing with on my own and apologized for not noticing it sooner. My aunt, my mother's sister, even contacted me and apologized for not realizing how differently I was treated growing up. The family dynamics were beginning to unravel, with everyone taking sides, and my parents were not handling it well. My phone started ringing nonstop again, this time with my parents exchanging angry, nasty messages and weeping voicemails. They were upset that I was damaging their family's reputation. They once left a message telling me that I was ruining Emma's children's life and that I would come to regret this decision someday. They'd then go back to imploring me to reconsider, saying things like, "We're family, and family helps each other." All of this has made me feel like a disaster. Part of me feels bad because I was trained to believe that family comes first, and it's difficult to break free of that conditioning. But another part of me is fatigued, thinking how long I've been trying to gain approval from people who just care about what benefits them. The knowledge stings, but I know that giving in now would result in years of financial and mental exhaustion, putting Emma's demands before of my own. Now I'm here on Reddit because I honestly don't know what to do next. Do I hold firm and maintain my limits because I know it's the best thing for me, or is there a compromise I'm not seeing? I could appreciate some unbiased counsel on this problem. Update 1. The situation with my parents and sister has deteriorated beyond my expectations. Just a few days after I told my grandparents the complete tale, they weren't lying about revising their will. They actually followed through, contacting their lawyer very immediately to ensure that my parents were removed from their inheritance. My grandparents had always been the quiet, keep the peace kind, so this wasn't just surprising, it was unprecedented in our family. However, it appears that my parents' years of favoritism toward Emma were the final straw. My grandparents also went above and beyond, convening a family meeting to clear the air. They planned it over the phone so that everyone, including myself, could attend, despite the fact that I live further away. They wanted everyone to grasp exactly what was going on, and based on what they implied, I had a hunch they were going to disclose stuff I had no idea about. The meeting was attended by a few aunts, uncles and cousins, basically, anyone close enough to be affected by this. When the conference began, my grandparents wasted no time. They instantly revealed that they had been paying large sums of money to my parents for the previous many years to aid both me and Emma with our education and future aspirations. They had given my parents more than $200,000 in all, with the expectation that it would be split evenly between Emma and me. I was speechless. I'd pushed my way through college on scholarships, student loans, and various part-time jobs, fighting to manage work and classes, whereas Emma seemed to live on another planet, scarcely lifting a finger and continually being bailed out of every bad decision. All those years, I'd been doing everything on my own while my grandparents sent money that I never received. My grandparents were infuriated. They had expected the money would benefit both of us, but now that they see how my parents had spent it, they feel absolutely deceived. They'd made it clear to my parents that they wished to support both of us, but it turned out that the money had primarily gone to Emma, covering her failed marriages, rent payments, and who knows what else. They requested that my parents provide a thorough accounting of how every dollar had been spent, threatening to bring attorneys if they did not comply. For a family as secretive as ours, this was an unimaginable step, but I could see they'd been tested. In addition, my grandparents indicated that they would establish trust funds for each of their grandkids, including Emma's 6 children. However, they made it clear that the money would be carefully handled by an independent trustee and could only be used for certain purposes, such as education or healthcare. They made it clear that they did not want my parents or Emma to have access to these funds, which was a big relief. At the very least, I knew Emma's children would have a chance at a solid future without my parents depleting those accounts for other purposes. Everything exploded following the family meeting. As they began to put the pieces together, relatives began to contact me one by one. Apparently, this wasn't the first time my parents had taken money from family members in the name of assisting the kids or funding family emergencies. An aunt told me that after Emma's second marriage failed, she loaned my parents a few $1,000s, believing it was for emergency expenses. Another cousin recalls my parents asking for money around the time I went to college, claiming it was to assist me get started, but I never saw any of it. Some of them were furious, believing they had been misled about where their money had gone. Others were simply unhappy, stating they had not known how much my parents valued Emma over me. One of my cousins even showed me screenshots of discussions with my parents after I graduated from college. They had actually discouraged family from attending my graduation, stating that I wanted to keep it small and avoid a major fuss. Meanwhile, I was hoping that my family would come and celebrate with me. It felt like a gut punch to realize how much they'd consciously sought to downplay my accomplishments while continually going all in for Emma. What astonished me the most was Emma herself reaching out to me. She sent a couple long emails, each with a unique tone. In one, she tried to seem as if she had always backed me, saying how she had never known our parents' bias toward her and how she had always assumed we were close. In another, she portrayed herself as a victim of our parents' manipulation, claiming that they had blinded her to the truth about our family dynamics. But what jumped out in each communication was that she always managed to include a request for assistance during this tough period. She tried to behave as if we were now best friends, but it was evident she still wanted me to open my wallet for her. It was difficult to believe. Even after my grandparents took such severe measures to put things right, and despite the family outrage, Emma still managed to make it all about her and what she could get from me. I felt like I was seeing the same narrative over and over. She couldn't seem to grasp the concept of limits or the fact that I was tired of being a constant source of comfort. I was determined not to allow her to manipulate me back into that role. While everything was going on, my folks were busy with their own campaign. They inundated me with voicemails that ranged from violent rants to emotional appeals. In one message, my mother accused me of pulling the family apart, claiming I would regret it one day when I discovered how much I had harmed everyone. My father would then ask me to reconsider, saying we could work things out quietly and it didn't have to be such a huge deal. They even tried to guilt trip me, telling me that I was placing my grandparents in an unpleasant situation and that I should consider how they would feel if the family divided as a result of all this. But their tactics were ineffective. My grandparents were behind me, and the rest of the family could see my parents' true colors. Some of them even contacted out to say they were proud of me for staying firm. My aunt contacted me in tears, apologizing for not noticing how differently my parents had treated me throughout the years. She said she'd always imagined I was more self-sufficient and didn't require as much assistance, but now she realized I'd been forced into that role because my parents had focused so much on Emma. As the family began to understand what I had been going through, more people came out with apologies or anecdotes about things they had noticed over the years. It was bittersweet. Part of me was relieved that the truth was finally being revealed, that others were acknowledging the sacrifices I had made on my own, but another part of me felt as if I was reliving years of pain and disappointment. All those times I felt invisible, all those times I questioned why my accomplishments didn't seem to matter so much, it all made sense suddenly. However, it did not erase the years of feeling like I was second best. The aftermath of this has been draining. My parents continue to refuse to accept responsibility for any of it. They're so concerned with the family's reputation that they can't see the damage they've done to it. This is just another disagreement that I should drop for the sake of peace, and they are trying to keep the entire thing under wraps. But I no longer feel bad for standing up for myself. I guess I'm finally seeing how crucial it is to create limits, especially with family. If I give in now, it will only mean more years of being used and taken for granted. For the first time, I feel in control of my own life. My grandparents have informed me that if my parents take this any further, they would deal with it. They've made it clear that they don't want me to feel pressured, and they've even informed me that if my parents continue to stir things up, they'll take further precautions to safeguard me. Just knowing I don't have to go through this alone has made a huge impact. Now I'm left wondering what family means at this point. All these years, I believed that being a good son and brother entailed putting everyone else first, sacrificing my own needs to ensure that everyone else was okay. But now I understand that there is a limit, and family isn't supposed to treat you like an ATM or overlook your own happiness simply because it's convenient. As things continue to unfold, I remain steadfast in my decision, but a part of me wonders if I should be doing more or approaching this differently. I'd greatly appreciate any suggestions on how to proceed. There is still so much to comprehend, and I'm trying to take it one day at a time. Update 2. My parents broke their quiet just a few days after my grandparents made their major news about the will. Instead of apologizing or acknowledging they may have gone too far, they sent a lengthy, meticulously crafted email attempting to justify every decision they had ever taken. They didn't just defend Emma, they virtually praised it, describing it as an investment because Emma had always been more family-oriented. Meanwhile, I was classified as self-sufficient and career-oriented, which they assumed indicated I didn't require as much assistance. They went on to clarify that their call for me to step in and fund Emma's life had nothing to do with money. They regarded it as even things out, giving Emma the same advantages they believed I had on my own. To add salt to the wound, they called me selfish for refusing to share my surplus wealth with my family. The email wasn't just words either. They sent a list of everything they claimed to have spent on me versus Emma. I'm talking about everything, including Emma's basic needs such as food, clothing, and housing. They mentioned her wedding expenses, property payments, and even post-divorce therapy. They even mentioned Emma's emotional assistance during her adolescent years, valuing and quantifying it. It was so ridiculous that I recognized they'd been thinking about it for a long time, most likely intending to hurl it back at me. They apparently shared this email with the entire extended family as well, aiming to present me as the selfish one. But it completely backfired. Relatives who had previously remained neutral began contacting me, appalled by what they viewed as an outlandish attempt to tax me for fundamental parenting. Some even apologized for not comprehending the kind of partiality I was dealing with. I believe my parents expected people to gather around them, but all they did was push everyone further away. In addition to this, my grandparents' lawyer became involved. My grandparents had always expected that any money they had given my parents over the years would be divided between me and Emma for our education and other essential costs. They soon discovered that the money had been spent on Emma's marriages and unsuccessful relationships. The lawyer wrote an official letter to my parents asking a thorough accounting of where the money had gone. My grandparents were prepared to take this to court if necessary, and I don't blame them. They felt betrayed, and so did I. It was like a tangled web of deception that had been growing for years, with me on the sidelines the entire time. In a strange twist, Emma's first ex-husband contacted me. He is the father of her two oldest children, and while we had never been close, we had remained civil. He told me that he had heard about everything and wanted to express his perspective. He confessed that when Emma became pregnant, my parents coerced him into marrying her, promising financial support as long as he followed through with the marriage. I knew they married quickly, but I had no idea my parents were that involved. Apparently, the majority of the support my parents had provided came from money they had received from my grandparents, money my grandparents had assumed was going toward Emma's and my futures. Emma's ex even apologized, claiming he regretted not standing up to them and allowing the situation to get out of control. My parents quickly noticed the email wasn't having the desired effect, so they tried to backtrack. They wrote a follow-up reply to everyone, explaining that the previous email was sent in rage and should not be taken seriously. But it was difficult to believe that reason given that their email had clearly been planned for some time. They could have printed and dispatched it as an official document, given how detailed it was. Trying to take it back now simply made them appear worse, and no one bought it. Emma had been silent for a few days following the family meeting, but she began reaching out again. Her tone had changed from guilt-tripping to more urgent. She sent a few emails, implying that she had always loved me and had no idea our parents treated us so differently. She even tried to justify her condition, stating she didn't want to burden me but was in a terrible situation with her children. Her texts became stranger, swinging between sentimental memories from childhood and reminders of how difficult life was for her with 6 children and a suffering husband. At one point, she mentioned her husband's economic difficulties and implied that her children were struggling in school due to the stress at home. It was difficult not to feel awful for Emma and her children, but I also couldn't ignore what had happened. She had known about our parents' fondness for years and took advantage of it, leaving me to fend for myself. She wanted me to come in and help her now that she was struggling. Her communications made me feel sad rather than outraged. She was my sister, and her children were completely innocent in all of this, but it was not my obligation to save her from a predicament she had helped create. More family members began sharing their stories. One of my aunts contacted me, apologizing for never saying anything when she observed things weren't fair between Emma and me. She remembered times when my parents plainly preferred Emma and ignored me, but she didn't want to get involved at the time. She also revealed that she had volunteered to help me with my college applications, but my parents declined, claiming that I had everything under control. In actuality, I was managing everything on my own, including school applications and work. My aunt admitted that she had no idea how much I had been left to manage on my own, and she felt bad for not intervening sooner. Family group chats reached a whole new level of awkwardness. Relatives began reaching out, asking if I needed anything or if they could help in any way. It was unusual to suddenly have so many people offering help and sympathy, especially because they'd never been so active in my life before. I loved their goodwill, but it became overpowering. Part of me felt like I shouldn't need their help right now. I'd already gone through the most difficult sections on my own. I mostly thanked them, wondering what else to say. Even my parents' closest friends started to distance themselves. A few people accepted their version of the story, that I was a workaholic who did not prioritize family. But after reading the email and hearing additional information, they began to see through my parents' explanations. Some even apologized, admitting they were wrong to judge me. One of them even indicated that my parents had borrowed money from them, citing family needs. They had assumed it was for necessary costs, but now they were wondering if they had been subsidizing Emma's lifestyle. Despite everything, my parents continued to push. They kept sending messages, arguing that I owed them for everything they'd done for me, that I was responsible for keeping the family together, and that my failure to support Emma was causing the family to fall apart. They claimed I was wrecking everything, damaging their reputation, and endangering Emma's children. It was frustrating because they were ignoring their own acts and pretended that none of this was their fault. For the time being, I'm not backing down. I refuse to be guilted into correcting problems that my parents caused, or to accept responsibility for Emma's decisions. It's still difficult to believe this is my family, that things have gotten to the point where I have to choose between my own well-being and what they call family loyalty. It's a lot to process, and I honestly don't know what the future holds, but for the first time, I feel like I'm standing up for myself and finally being heard. That is, at the very least, a positive step forward. Update 3. The situation has reached an unexpected conclusion. After all of the chaos and hidden issues that had surfaced, my grandparents decided to take a tough stance. They scheduled a final family gathering, this time with their lawyer present. It felt as if a chapter was coming to an end, but there were still so many wounds and unresolved feelings in the air. However, this wasn't simply talk. My grandparents had a plan, and they were not going to waste any more time. They claimed that they had not only revised their will, but were also taking quick action with their assets to avoid further abuse. For years, my parents had been living rent-free in a family-owned holiday home. It was supposed to be a temporary arrangement, but my parents made it their permanent home, expecting it to be passed down to them. But that's over. My grandparents are selling the land and intend to use the funds to establish educational trusts for all of their great-grandchildren. This includes Emma's and my cousin's children. My grandparents also implemented a reorganization strategy to ensure that no more funds were diverted accidentally. They are establishing annual educational grants for any family members pursuing higher education or professional credentials. However, these monies will be administered by an impartial trustee, with no family members participating. My folks were noticeably shaken upon hearing this. Losing the free lodging was terrible enough, but the realization that they would no longer have access to my grandparents' land was a rude awakening. For once, they didn't argue, or at least realized it wouldn't help. They simply looked defeated, which was unusual for my parents given their years of pride and control. My grandparents gave them 60 days to leave the land, with no extensions. The lawyer handed them a signed document, and my parents had no choice but to comply. In a stunning turn of events, my parents admitted to certain financial errors concerning school monies supplied by my grandparents years ago. This was a tremendous revelation, and many family members were shocked. With few options left, my parents signed a formal repayment agreement. Even though I'm sure it would be difficult for them, after they leave the property, they will have to move into a small apartment and severely reduce their lifestyle. It's evident that this is a significant adjustment for them. They've lived well on family assistance for so long that I doubt they ever expected to have to budget or downsize. Meanwhile, Emma appears to have accepted the reality of the situation. Her support system is basically collapsing around her. My parents' free support is no longer available, and she can no longer rely on them to pay her expenses or bail her out if her husband's business initiatives fail. Instead of moaning or trying to guilt-trip me, she is now taking efforts to improve her own situation. She's enrolled in a vocational program for medical billing and coding, which should provide her with a consistent income and the opportunity to raise her children on her own terms. Her spouse has taken on more hours at his delivery job and appears to be making an attempt to contribute to the family's costs. Emma even sent me an email, not asking for money, but simply requesting assistance with her resume. I decided to check into it, assuming it was a little way to help without encouraging her dependence. Hearing from Emma's children has been one of the most shocking and pleasant developments. They contacted me through Emma's father, her first ex-husband. Apparently, my grandparents had planned for them to attend family therapy sessions. They'd been dealing with a lot of confusion about family dynamics and had been caught up in so much drama. Now, with the help of a therapist, they're starting to comprehend the intricate relationships and favoritism they've grown up in. The elder kids apologized for the guilt-tripping messages they had delivered when everything initially began. They said they didn't realize how much pressure their mother was placing on me, and they felt horrible about being used as pawns. I promised them everything was okay and that none of this was their fault. They were just kids, after all, and they were simply following their mother's instructions. I'm confident that treatment will help kids learn that they are not responsible for resolving the conflict amongst the adults in their lives. My parents appear to be adjusting to their new situation, but they are having difficulty totally accepting it. In one final attempt to rewrite the narrative, they began sending me random photos from my childhood, each with captions like, "Remember when we were a happy family," and "Don't forget who's been there since the beginning." I'm not sure if they're genuinely trying to make amends or if it's just another ploy to play on my emotions. Some texts describe how much they suffered to raise me, while others depict them as victims abandoned by everyone they cared about. They've also been telling anyone who will listen that the family has turned against them, presenting the situation as if they were innocent victims simply trying to help Emma. But I believe most of the family has seen through it by now. They maintain their distance, and their interactions are now courteous but distant. As for me, the entire experience has been eye-opening. I had no idea how far the favoritism extended or how much my family had been exploited over the years. My grandparents have been great throughout this process, demonstrating strength and justice that I had never appreciated before. They're taking on the role of champions for the future generation, ensuring that nothing like what happened to me and Emma happens again. The entire process has been a challenging but essential reality check. It has revealed me who actually cares about me and who only sees me as a source of financial assistance. Finally, I want to thank everyone who has supported me. Thank you and farewell. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.